Here we are in a new decade, the 2020s, the roaring 20s, and this is Dan in his van, episode 10. I'm going to talk today about library music. What's library music? Sounds dull, sounds not worth doing. Well, being a musician, making a living out of music involves lots of income streams. So it's not all about sticking £5,000 worth of gear into a 500 quid van to do a 50 quid gig. It's not, although they are enjoyable, of course. One must obtain a balance. Now, library music is essentially stock music that filmmakers or program makers or anyone using radio or making anything essentially that's going to be broadcast, they use stock music. Why do they do that? Well, if you want an original song by an original artist from a major record label, you're going to have to pay lots and lots and lots of money for it. And lots of the time, if you're making especially a series, a daytime TV series or something, you're going to want just snippets of music that don't cost very much at all. And that's where myself and other musicians come in. Now, when you record something, it obviously has to be extremely clean, squeaky clean, everything in tune, basically a full production. And that means that, for example, there's no rhythmic errors or no sort of out of tune things or anything like that. So library music is generally lyric free. You wouldn't have words. You might have backing vocals or lars or whatever, but you wouldn't have lyrics. No fade-ins or fade-outs. And you would usually supply a mix, a full mix, whether it be a tune of 3 minutes or whatever. And if you supply shorter versions, like a minute version, which is basically 59.8 seconds, and a 30 second, which is sort of 29.8, that would fit on an advert, for example. The more edits that you provide, the better it is for the end user, and the less they have to do editing, and therefore the cheaper it is for them. The better it is then for you, because you're more likely to get your material used. Now, I've been doing library music for about 12 years. And in that time, I've learned a lot about the sort of the trade, as it were. And the library companies that I work for offer basic production advice, which is really good. They're saying, look, if you do this, it'll sell, or if you mix, or if you put some horns on, it will sell more easily. And these are the people in the know. Their livelihood depends on being supplied by composers and arrangers and other musicians. Now, formatting. It's very important when you are mixing on your computer or your whatever digital audio workstation you're using, to supply multi sort of formats. So you would really err on the side of keeping things at full linear. That is 44.1 kilohertz or 48 kilohertz. What's the difference between those two? Well, 48 kilohertz is a direct divisor of the 96 kilohertz sampling rate, which is common on things like DVD, which I know sadly don't really exist anymore. But, if you get onto a box set, a BBC box set with your tune, you stand to make a lot of money. So supplying formats, you should try and supply lots of different things. Supply 44.1 kilohertz, 48 kilohertz. In the 1990s or late 80s and 1990s, there was a sort of format issue in that CD, which was 44.1, was around at the same time as the DAT recorder, the digital audio tape. And the two frequencies became sort of rivals, but also it prevented for example, CDs being ripped by a DAT, and then you could make more CDs from that. So if you had a different sampling rate, it wouldn't be possible, which is why the earliest DAT machines were 48 kilohertz only. But essentially what you have to do is supply these library companies with as many different formats as you can. Don't worry too much about MP3 unless they ask for it. But MP3 should always be produced at 320 kilobits per second, which is the highest quality MP3. It's comparable to a 44.1 kilohertz 16-bit audio file. Talking of bit depth for your 48 or 44.1 kilohertz, try and supply 24-bit because that is the standard now. Some companies actually won't accept 16-bit anymore. There's a hell of a lot of competition, and things like vocal recordings or strings or orchestral things or very low-level ambient recordings, they really rely on the fact that you've got a very low noise floor. So 24-bit is a must. Now, when you supply all these things, you might be thinking, I'm clogging up their inbox with all of these recordings, but actually they'll be glad of it, because online libraries, it's very easy for the end user to search exactly for what they want. And it could be that they want an MP3, or they could be that they want 44.1 or 48, or indeed 96 kilohertz. Now, that is the highest sort of sampling frequency that's in common use. You can get 192 kilohertz. Really, the difference is rather subtle. But 96 kilohertz does make a massive difference for stuff that is really detailed in the top end. So, for example, the breathiness of a recording, if you're doing sound effects or external, sound, or vocals or strings, high things like cymbal spectra, they really do rely on a nice high sample rate. But most of the time, the end user is going to be rendering it onto a file, which is then going to be compressed for broadcast. You could do it. You could supply a 96 kilohertz. It doesn't hurt, but it's a lot more in terms of memory. It's whether you can afford that on the computer or whether your upload speed is any good or not. Now, in the olden days, when I first started doing library music, there wasn't really an internet to speak of in terms of lots of data. So I would send stuff to companies through the post in a jiffy bag on a CDR. How times have changed. So, and of course, CDRs will have errors on them. You can't guarantee that the file is going to actually reach the end user in usable condition. There might be too many errors on it to be used. Don't forget, digital audio workstations now really rely on absolutely error-free recording and transmission. So it's an income stream for me. Every quarter, I'm a member of the PRS, so if you do any library music at all and you send it to any companies, you have to become a member of the PRS, and you get a PRS number, and then you get a quarterly return from the PRS via the library company. Or rather, the library company pay you via PRS. Generally speaking, it's a 50-50 split, and you think, well, I'm doing all the work here, but your stuff is then on a platform. Don't worry if you supply any small library companies. In the modern era, if a small library company gets swallowed up by a larger one, the catalogue will go with it. So you end up actually on a larger library company, which could be to your benefit anyway. So you should just supply library companies. Now, how I started with it was that I just went in cold. I just sat down with a cup of tea and a list of library companies that I got from the Musicians Union website. And I just cold called them. I just said, look, I've got this, and I had an album of material ready so that I could send stuff to them. Most said, no, we're not looking, and a few said, yeah, please do send your stuff. And two of them got back to me saying, yep, we'd like to feature your stuff on our website. And we can supply, companies and that sort of thing. Now, you get PRS, which is the usage of your material. Whether it be online or on the telly or whatever. You also get a mechanical royalty, because library companies tend to still print CDs that are, albums that they can send out to people, or that they just put in a studio on a shelf, or a film studio, or whatever it is, production house might have some CDs with your stuff on it. So if you end up on a lot of CDs, you see a taste of that as well. It's all about income stream. And even though it's for a library and may not be used for years and years, you should still take pride in your recordings and your writing. I've supplied stuff. I did a reggae album 3 years ago now, and it's just starting to come back to me in terms of my revenue. So it might take an album a year or two to sort of fully get out there. And of course, you will be seeing stuff that was, when you see your return, you'll be seeing stuff that was used in, maybe 12 months ago. So it does take a little time to get to see a result. Don't be disheartened by that. It's a bit like YouTube. Here I am making videos for YouTube, and yes, I see money from the advertising revenue. And it's another income stream that means that you can then pay your rent, you can buy food, you do all the other things that self-employed musicians so often find it difficult to do. So, income streams. That's where it is.